world awoke to headlines that seemed almost too miraculous to believe. Across the globe, newspapers blared in bold print, IMF forgives billions in African debt. On television screens from Washington to London to Paris, anchors delivered the news with smiles stretched wide, their tones suggesting that history had been rewritten overnight. Reporters spoke of hope, of renewal, of a gift to a continent long chained to debt. $3 billion wiped away, erased with the stroke of a pen, and wrapped neatly in the glowing vocabulary of opportunity, relief, and partnership. To Western audiences, it was theater, a triumph staged for cameras. For politicians, it was a moment to pose before flashing lights, to present themselves as merciful patrons of progress. The mood was celebratory, as if debts alone were the shackles holding Africa back, and their erasure the key to liberation. But in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traore did not celebrate. He did not smile for the cameras. Instead, he clenched his fist, leaned forward, and whispered to his advisors words that carried centuries of memory. Behind their smiles, there is always a trap. That quiet phrase separated him from the chorus of applause. Where others saw relief, he saw a snare. Where others praised generosity, he smelled calculation. Africa's history had taught him that no gift ever comes free. After decades of conditional loans, structural adjustments, and austerity programs imposed by the same creditors, why now, without warning, would the IMF suddenly decide to play the role of savior? The question was sharper than most dared to ask. Could debt be erased so easily in a continent whose soil holds over $40 billion in gold, billions more in oil, and uranium indispensable to Europe's nuclear power? What gift could ever be free when such wealth lay beneath the African earth? Western leaders staged photographs, smiling beside African officials, calling it the beginning of a new partnership. Yet Traoré asked the question too dangerous for polite conversation. What are we giving away in return? His skepticism was not cynicism, it was memory. Memory of colonial treaties signed in good faith but written to enslave. Memory of contracts dressed in friendship that hollowed out nations. So while the world applauded debt relief, Burkina Faso stood still. Its leader refused to clap because he had seen this act before. The applause was loud. The headlines glowed. But the fine print whispered another story. Debt relief, they called it. $3 billion gone as if by miracle. Yet beneath the polished language sat slippery words, phrases like commodity secured and resource backed. To ordinary citizens, they sounded like harmless financial jargon, the filler of contracts few people ever read. But to those who signed them, the meaning was brutally simple. Collateral, not relief at all. Collateral in the form of gold bars, oil wells, uranium mines. What is debt forgiveness if the price is your nation's lifeblood? Within weeks, African governments rushed to embrace the offer. A signature here, a handshake there, and suddenly debts that had weighed down treasuries seemed to evaporate. Yet closer inspection revealed the reality. Every erased debt was replaced by a lien on the future. One country signed away 40% of its offshore oil revenue for the next decade. Another mortgaged nearly 25 tons of gold reserves, over $1.8 billion worth at today's price, just to see its books cleaned. For the IMF, it was a spectacle. Western investors applauded, and stock markets rewarded the illusion of stability. But in towns and villages, ordinary people began asking, is this freedom or chains painted gold? Burkina Faso's answer was defiance. Traoré refused to sign. He read the clauses with their vague promises and soft assurances and saw through the disguise. Debt relief tied to resources was not generosity. It was repossession in the language of diplomacy. Once gold is pledged, once uranium is listed as collateral, sovereignty no longer belongs to the people. So Traoré took an unexpected step. He created a secret financial investigation unit, a hand-picked team of auditors, economists, and intelligence officers. Their mission, exposed the strings hidden in the so-called relief. They scoured contracts, traced offshore accounts, compared today's deals with yesterday's colonial treaties. What they found was chilling, the same pattern of extraction, dressed in modern suits. The empire had not disappeared. it had changed clothes. The clauses told the truth. Repayment, in case of default, would not be in dollars. It would be in barrels of oil, in tons of uranium, in shipments of gold, delivered not at market rates, but at steep discounts, sometimes 30% below global benchmarks. Imagine a country forced to sell crude at $50 a barrel when the world price was $72. Over a decade, that meant losses of billions. Was this relief or legalized plunder? Traoré's refusal came at a cost. Western media branded him reckless, uncooperative, naive. Yet across Africa, his stance sparked admiration. Students in Dakar debated sovereignty late into the night. Journalists in Lagos likened the contracts to pawnshop loans. Economists in Nairobi crunched the numbers and concluded that debt relief was nothing but structured surrender. And then came the revelation that shook everything. Investigators uncovered a leaked dossier stamped Phoenix Dollar Commodity Stabilization Program. The document linked directly to advisors around Donald Trump. It laid out a plan to anchor a new digital US dollar, not on innovation or productivity, but on Africa's resources. Gold, oil, uranium would become the backbone of a Phoenix dollar, designed as a counter to China's rising digital yuan. 5 African nations, the documents showed, could support $500 billion in new U.S. currency issuance. Burkina Faso's uranium, valued at $2.7 billion, was penciled in as a strategic stabilizer. Sahel gold reserves totaling nearly 600 metric tons, worth over $40 billion, were mapped as collateral for America's digital empire. Was this partnership or theft with a smile? For Traoré, the dossier was vindication. His suspicions were confirmed. Debt relief was a disguise, a way to lock Africa's minerals into America's financial war with China. But it was also a warning. If Africa signed, its resources would become weapons in a battle fought by others, invisible to its own people. So he chose exposure. Not quiet diplomacy, not backroom bargaining, but public disclosure. He prepared to put the truth directly in the hands of citizens. In a continent where truth is often locked in secret files, this was revolutionary. Page by page, contracts marked with red ink were broadcast on national television. Charts explained how debt relief mortgaged resources at discounted prices. Universities held debates with the documents in hand. Farmers saw simplified graphs showing the billions lost. What had been hidden in legal jargon was translated into the language of everyday life. It was not politics. It was nation building, a shield of truth against financial imperialism. The gamble was immense. Sanctions, isolation, even destabilization loomed. But Traoré knew that silence would cost more. Better to risk exposure than sell the future. And then came the night. Before a packed hall in Ouagadougou, Captain Traoré stepped to the podium. With cameras rolling, he read the contracts aloud, clause by clause, stripping away the disguise. Then came the final blow. He held up the Phoenix Dollar dossier, stamped with Trump's advisors' names. "This is not debt relief," he declared. "This is theft dressed as generosity." They want our gold, our oil, our uranium, not to erase our burdens, but to mint their own empire. The reaction was explosive. Across Burkina Faso, screens lit up with disbelief. Farmers shook their heads. Teachers replayed the numbers for students. Traders gasped at the losses. Social media caught fire. Hashtags like hashtag not relief but robbery and hashtag Phoenix Dollar Trap spread across languages and borders. Memes mocked the idea of a gift that stole futures. Protests ignited. Placards read, "Better hungry in freedom than full in chains." Students marched in Bamako. Journalists debated contracts in Lagos. Artists in Johannesburg painted murals of Africa breaking golden shackles. Western capitals scrambled. Editorials dismissed the revelations as political theater, but analysts quietly warned, if even a few nations refused IMF contracts, the program could unravel. Commodity markets trembled. Gold spiked to $2,600 an ounce. Uranium prices surged, threatening Europe's nuclear supply. Wall Street began to sweat. Sanctions were threatened, denials issued. But Africans had read the contracts with their own eyes. A taxi driver in Ouagadougou put it best, "If they deny, why not show us their clean version? Why only words, never papers?" Soon, Niger withdrew. Mali followed. Nigeria and Algeria announced reviews. Dominoes fell, and with them the foundation of the IMF's $3 billion program. The Phoenix dollar began to collapse before it could take flight. For once, Africa was not begging for terms. It was setting them. And in Bamako, before a summit of leaders, Traoré declared, "Alone they can sanction us. Together they cannot break us." Applause thundered. The symbolism was clear. Africa was not fragmented. It was speaking as one. For once, Africa was not begging for terms. It was setting them. And in Bamako, before a summit of leaders, Traoré declared, "Alone they can sanction us. Together they cannot break us." Applause thundered. The symbolism was clear. Africa was not fragmented. It was speaking as one. The IMF could not recover. Washington's grand design cracked. The Phoenix dollar, conceived as rebirth, had burned to ash. And in its place stood something more enduring: dignity. Burkina Faso did not receive billions. Its people still worked long days, still faced hardship, but they had refused to sell sovereignty. They had chosen freedom over chains disguised as gifts, and perhaps that was the greater triumph.